All right, good evening, everybody. Those of you who are just trickling in here, feel free to take a moment to get settled, get your bearings. We're going to take about a minute or two as everybody gets into the room, and we'll get started with our housekeeping and introductions here in just a minute. While you are filtering in, if you can hear us, see us, feel free to give us a thumbs up. Also, feel free to let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from, maybe a top choice school in mind. Just some shout outs to let us know where our audience is coming from this evening. Looks like we've already got about 120 folks in the room, so there should be plenty of room in the chat for you all. And we'll use that to drive engagement throughout the session. For the rest of the folks that are just getting in here, we'll get started in just a minute. See a lot of folks from all over the US, Chicago, Minnesota, see plenty of folks from Maryland, up the Northeast side, New York, my home state of Michigan, a couple of folks, Texas, very diverse audience across the country. So afternoon and good evening, where everybody is tuning in from. Feel free to keep dropping those in the chat. I love looking at them as we continue to move through, but we'll go ahead and get started with some initial housekeeping notes. As we're using the chat, that's where we'll start. Those of you that are using the chat right now, that's an awesome place to drop your kind of shout outs, feedback, ask any questions during the presentation. Feel free to use the chat just to answer back really quickly. But for our Q&A at the end of the session, any critical questions that you would like to ask, anything that would go to Mason, anything that would go to our team here at Crimson, please feel free to put that in the Q&A so that we can save it for the end. So again, chat, feel free to put in where you're tuning in from and where you might want to go. Q&A, any questions for our host, our speaker, anybody. Cool. So just to give a quick introduction as well, a Crimson education webinar. So welcome to Crimson. If this is your first webinar joining us, we're really happy to have you here. For those who might be repeat webinar viewers, welcome back again. We're excited to have you for this evening. But Crimson at its core, if you're unfamiliar with us, we are one of the world's largest admissions consulting companies. We work with students in helping them gain access to some of the best universities in the country, as well as around the world with UK strategy. We're focused specifically on the US tonight, so you can think Ivy League, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, where I used to work, any number of incredible schools. We are equipped to help set you up for success here. So we work with students one-to-one with our strategists like Mason, formerly myself, and we are really, really proud of the fact that the students that do choose to work with Crimson, on average, have about a 4.5 times greater chance of acceptance over the general applicant rate at those top schools. So that's Crimson in a nutshell as the host this evening. For our actual agenda, we're focused on roadmap planning for those of you who are sophomores and juniors in the room, which is why we didn't ask what age everybody is tuning in. We can kind of assume from the content tonight. So we'll start by going over the Common App, what it is, what materials you'll be collecting together to submit to an admissions officer. We'll talk about how admissions officers evaluate your academic achievement. So your grades, your test scores, even the things that are more qualitative, like teacher letters of recommendation. We'll move on to talking about extracurriculars, both institutional and innovative impact here at Crimson and how that looks in building your projects in and out of the classroom. Talking about crafting compelling personal statements, so telling a story that might not be the first time we've ever heard it before, but it's a story that's still unique to you, tells us about who you are. Then we'll end closer to the end with a timeline for those of you who are sophomores and juniors about really specific tasks or items you can be thinking about at these different points in your process. And we'll talk about how they pair up with the application itself. And then we'll finish with a Q&A with Mason at the end. So we're going to bring Mason in just a moment. I have the pleasure of introducing Mason this evening. Mason is a former admissions officer within the University of California system at UC Santa Barbara, also a graduate from UC Santa Barbara with his bachelor's in communication and psychology, went on to the Ivy master's in higher education, and works with a ton of our students here at Crimson to great success, having guided them to pretty much all the Ivies that you can think of, as well as Emory, Notre Dame, NYU. You can read the list there on the slide, and serves as a senior strategist here at Crimson, just showing that expertise at a higher level, and has been here for a long time working with our students. So Mason, I'm going to hand it off to you. We'll come back in for the Q&A later, but thank you so much. And Mason, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to have the chance to speak with you this evening about building your candidacy as a sophomore or a junior when thinking about U.S. institutions. We're going to have a lot of information today, and so if you feel a little bit panicked about how much information is on these slides, rest assured that this is going to actually be sent to you, a recording of this. So these slides might be dense. We will be going through them fairly quickly. Just a little housekeeping that you will be getting a copy of this recording after. Okay, so let's go ahead and just jump on in and start talking about the Common App. It is aptly named the Common App because it is the most common application for US applications. Over 1,000 universities actually accept the Common App portal, and it allows you to apply to up to 20 universities at a time. Typically, I find that students hit the sweet spot of about 10 to 15 universities that they're applying to, but with a Common App, you can apply to up to 20 schools. Now, keep in mind that not every university is going to use the Common App portal. So schools like MIT, Georgetown, and the UC schools actually use a different application portal. So you can actually apply to different institutions with different applications. The Common App itself opens on August 1st, but if you are working with Crimson, you'll typically start working on a lot of application components well before that August 1st opening date. Components of the Common App. So we're going to talk a lot about these pillars throughout the webinar today, but academics. The academic transcript that you're going to be generating from your high school is actually going to be sent in conjunction with all of the other components that are asked on the Common App. It's a really long document, as I'm sure that you're familiar with. And so it actually gets sent separately than what is actually put on the Common Application. So you're going to have a lot of like personal information, demographic information that's going to be asked of you. And then they're going to ask you of your activities list. So up to 10 items for anything extracurricular related, which we'll jump into during today's webinar. And there's going to be essays like the personal statement and supplemental essays and letters of recommendation. Key dates. So early rounds for admissions. So August is the opening date, but November 1st is the most common first deadline. And we call that the early round. We have two different types of typical early rounds. So we have early decision, which means that you've already decided that you want to go there if you were admitted. So it's actually binding. So if you do get admitted from early decision, you have to go there. But then we have early action, which is a non-binding offer. And with Crimson, we do strategize what your early round is going to look like based on your interests, your needs, and what your personal and academic goals are. Then we have the regular rounds. Those are typically in January, and they're typically the first 2 weeks of January, depending on the schools that you're applying to, with a couple notable exceptions. But that's basically what you can expect for application season whenever it is that you're going to apply. Now, we're going to talk about each of these components of the Common App, and I consider these like the pillars of the university application process. So we got 40% roughly being academic, 30% being extracurriculars, and 30% being everything else, which in the eyes of admissions officers, they consider personal qualities or college fit. All right, so this is going to be things like essays, letters of recommendation, and interviews. All right, we are going to jump into all of these components. All right, and so we'll talk about them as how they're being reviewed by admissions officers, but then what you can do as a sophomore or a junior to help prepare yourself for how your application is going to be reviewed in each of these respective categories. So let's go ahead and start talking about the biggest chunk of the admissions process, academics. When an admissions officer gets your file, when they get your application, they're going to want to make sure that you have this term called academic readiness. All right, that's how we talk about it behind the scenes. We just want to make sure that you are ready for the intense academic rigor of our institution. Now, you can imagine that because of the different schools and because of their different reputations and rankings, there's going to be a different level of academic readiness for one school versus another. So that's why admissions percentages might look a little different. And a lot of that comes to the academic rigor and expectation of what's going to be asked of you as a student. Generally speaking, admissions officers are going to look at these 4 different characteristics of your academics. First is the quality of your transcript. What classes have you taken in freshman year and built upon over the course of your entire career, your entire tenure in high school. They want to see the number of courses that you've taken and the subjects that you've taken throughout your 4 years. Some schools, like the University of California, have pretty strict subject requirements, meaning that they want you to take a number of subjects per year that relate to their subject requirement. So an example of this would be, they want you to take 4 years of college preparation English. All right, for those of you interested in STEM, they're going to recommend that you take 4 years of mathematics, but only 3 years are actually required. Okay. So there are some subjects that the admissions officers are going to want to see that prepare you for the academic rigor of whatever it is that you're going to be studying at that school. With Crimson, we can help you strategize your subject selection, basically at every step of the way, to make sure that you are hitting all the marks and ticking off all the boxes of the courses that the admissions officers are going to want you to have taken. In addition to that, admissions officers are going to want to see that you are taking advantage of the most academically rigorous coursework available to you to show your academic readiness for their institution. Now, there's a couple of different things here. The first is admissions officers want to see that you are challenging yourself, that you're having academic ambition, but they want to make sure that you're balancing that with your actual performance. All right, what I mean by that is there's a big difference in taking all easy classes and earning all A's, and taking all hard classes and earning all F's. All right, so you need to find the balance as to what's going to be setting you up for the most success, to find that perfect balance between the most academic rigor that you can handle and doing well on those respective courses. Okay, a lot of this comes with self-awareness and figuring out what subjects are you naturally good at and which subjects do you need to spend a little bit more time and study skill development in order to actually set yourself up for solid grades. Again, admissions officers are going to want to see that you're taking advantage of the most academically rigorous coursework available to you and doing well, right? So it's finding that tipping point as to what is going to be setting you up for success or what might be too much or too little. The next part of the academic component are standardized exams. So SAT versus ACT versus advanced placement versus international baccalaureate, right? Typically speaking, admissions officers want to see that you are going to be able to take tests and exams and hopefully do well in them. So SAT and ACT, there's actually no preference in terms of which one you take. They basically are evaluating the same thing, but they want to see that you have taken one of those exams and hopefully achieved a target score for their institution. For advanced placement or international baccalaureate, and we'll talk about these a little bit later as well, but this kind of goes hand in hand with the academic rigor. All right, but you can actually self-study for AP exams and IB exams. So that could be a way to showcase to admissions officers that you are ambitious academically and are taking more advanced courses or self-studying for them. All right, again, AP versus IB, there's actually not really a preference for one versus the other, but there is going to be a different way to showcase your academic narrative where AP or IB might be a better fit for you, the way that you are and the student that you are. So again, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that could be a good way to set yourself up for success and something that your Crimson strategist could help you with in deciding what is going to be a better curriculum for you if your school offers both. When it comes to transcripts, pretty straightforward. These are going to be all of the courses and all of the grades that you've earned from grade 12 back all the way to the start of grade 9. Right? Admissions officers are going to assess your academic performance, and that goes hand in hand with their direct association of academic readiness. They want to see your ambition, right? Have you taken advantage of advanced classes? Were you academically ambitious? Exploration. How did you use your elective courses? Where were your interests outside of these like core courses of math, science, English, history? Where else have your interests lied? And what was available to you to explore at high school that you took advantage of? Advancement. How did you progress from grade 9 to grade 12? Did you maybe have struggles with mathematics or science starting in grade 9? But did you show an academic growth trajectory where you might not have understood the expectations or the study habits necessary to get a good grade in that class, but then you figured it out in sophomore year or junior year and showed an academic growth trajectory, right? So that's what a transcript can basically showcase. Admissions officers are pretty adept at reading between the lines and trying to figure out that academic narrative. But for anything that might be needing to be directly stated to them, we do have the additional information section in the application to just give very clear transparency on what was going on academically if we ever need to give them that information. Standardized exams. So SAT versus ACT. A lot of universities in the world of COVID went test optional. But now that we're kind of on the tail end, and especially for those of you who are juniors, next year, a lot of them are reverting back to being mandatory. And so for those of you who are sophomores, definitely, you'll definitely be needing to consider taking the SAT or ACT. Some schools are always test optional or what they call test flexible, but the majority of institutions are going to ask that you take either the SAT or the ACT for the application requirements. Okay. Like I said earlier, SAT versus ACT, in the eyes of admissions officers, they're viewed almost identically. They're just different exams. All right, so the SAT has 154 questions, ACT has 215. SAT is going digital, and ACT might be in the future, but as of right now, there's just differences in them in terms of how they're proctored. SAT is roughly about 2 hours, ACT 3 hours and 35 minutes. You'll see that there's also different test dates for each of them. SAT roughly 6 times per year and ACT only 4 times per year. And so with your Crimson strategist, you can also develop your testing strategy based on which one is going to set you up better for success on that exam. A lot of that's going to come down to your preparation in mathematics. So you can see in the selections, SAT is basically a 50-50 split between math and reading and writing, whereas ACT is a four-way split between math, science, reading, and writing. So depending on your proficiencies in those particular subjects, the ACT might be a better fit for you compared to SAT. Also, testing timeline, the duration of the exam, all things to consider when choosing SAT versus ACT. When it comes to timeline, for you, those of you who are sophomores in the room, when it comes to academics, we want you to make sure that you're planning a course load that has academic rigor, but that you're going to be able to find that balancing point of academic rigor and academic success and performance. For those classes that you might be struggling with, we want to make sure that you're getting tutoring to set yourself up for success there. We'd also want you to plan for AP courses or the International Baccalaureate curriculum, as that is an 11th and 12th grade curriculum. If AP courses are limited at your school, we would also help you strategize choosing additional exams that you can self-study for, or use something like the Crimson Global Academy, or virtual high school, or some other like online schooling system to help prepare you for that AP exam. Or you can just use your own test prep materials and self-study for them. Last but not least, looking at those course requirements for your major to make sure that you are setting yourself up for the classes that admissions officers are going to want you to take. That's particularly for STEM business economics majors. Timeline for juniors. Again, finding that tipping point, that balancing point between academic rigor and academic performance. Setting for the SAT or ACT if you haven't already taken it, taking AP or IB exams, taking the SAT or ACT, and then building connections with teachers for letters of recommendation. When it comes to letters of rec, admissions officers are only going to ask you for junior or senior year teachers for letters of recommendation. So junior year becomes a little bit more strategic when it comes to asking for letters of rec, because you can ask a junior year teacher. A lot of information. So here are the solid 4 takeaways when thinking about academics. First, admissions officers want to see that you're taking advantage of the most academically rigorous coursework possible. So consider taking challenging courses. Next, sit the standardized exams, especially if you know that you can do well earlier on, because it frees up some of your time later on. So you're going to have to take the SAT or ACT. It's just one of those things about the college admissions process. Number 3, you can be selective as to what you submit in terms of your AP exams. Let's say you didn't do well in one of them, you can actually choose to not send that or cancel the exam after you've set it. Right, so you can actually be a little bit strategic on some elements, and then also for your academic transcripts, we can be strategic typically when choosing those classes. It's not necessarily the submission part, but we can be strategic or selective in a strategic way. And then that goes hand in hand with number 4, choose your subjects carefully. Certain schools have those certain subject or number of years for that subject as a requirement. So for the Ivies themselves, they recommend 4 years of math, English, and science, and then 2 to 4 years of history and a language. All right. So a lot of information about academics. If you have questions, go ahead and use that Q&A feature on Zoom to go ahead and ask any follow-up questions that we'll save for the end for academics or anything else that's going to be happening during the webinar. Let's talk a little bit about extracurriculars. So going back to our pillars, extracurriculars are approximately 30% of the review process. So academics are the biggest chunk. They should always be priority number 1. But then we have another big chunk when it comes to extracurriculars. So basically, anything that you do outside of class that is not for a letter grade is going to be considered extracurriculars. All right, so this could be things like clubs, organizations, sports, arts, volunteer hours, work experience, research, anything that you do for your family as a responsibility. All of these things are kind of grouped into the extracurricular resume or CV. When it comes to the common application, you have 10 activities that you can list on there. And then you get a certain number of characters for different components of that activity description. So 50 characters for describing your position or your leadership role. Right, so president, founder, organizer, team member, participant. For the organization, you get 100 characters. So high school soccer team, American Red Cross. And then you get 150 characters for the description. Now, 150 characters throws people off all the time. 150 characters, it's 150 characters, not words. So basically think of this as kind of like a tweet on Twitter. It's really that short. And so the activities list trips people up a little bit every year. And so that's something that we as strategists help you start earlier on, just to get ahead of that curve, because we're going to be worrying about a lot of other things during application season. And so we want to kind of knock out your activity descriptions sooner rather than later. When it comes to your list of descriptions, you will kind of on the drop-down menu, put your activity type, whether it's art, athletics, debate, speech, foreign language, those types of things. Your participation years, grade 9, 10, 11, or 12. Timing, meaning how many hours a week would you participate on average? All right, and then number of weeks per year. You can also click whether or not you want to continue this activity at university or not. Sometimes if you are admitted and you click that you want to continue that activity, that information gets sent to student clubs and organizations, and then they'll start spamming you with emails. So really only click on that if you truly are interested. It's not going to affect your chances of admission, but it will affect your university inbox when you first start as a freshman. When it comes to evaluating extracurricular activities, admissions officers are really looking for what matters to you. They want to try to see this narrative of you have complete and total control over the activities that you are participating in. Why are you getting involved in them? What is so interesting and compelling to you as a student that you are dedicating your time, energy, and resources to this activity outside of school? This is the start of really being able to craft and develop your non-academic narrative. Okay, so they want to see what is your intellectual curiosity outside of the classes that you're forced to take in high school. Right, so where's your attention gravitating towards in your extracurriculars? Do you have a creative side to you? Right, are you ambitious? Are you taking initiative to start new things? Leadership, what's your commitment level? What are your personal characteristics or qualities that can be derived from some of these extracurricular activities? Right, some of these would be like self-awareness, community engagement, service orientation. Right, the general idea for extracurricular activities is that for freshman year, it's all about exploration, right? So my recommendation for a freshman, which none of you are freshmen, but my recommendation for freshmen is that you really take the time to just explore as many things that are of interest to you. For those of you who are sophomores, my recommendation is to decide which activities you are most interested in and what activities you're the best at. So decide which ones you're most interested in and ones that you're good at, and then double down on those ones. For those of you who are juniors, my recommendation is that you try to lead as much as possible. Junior year is all about leadership or taking initiative. Okay, there's a couple of different ways that you can showcase that initiative. It could be something like being elected into a leadership role, or setting yourself up for a leadership role in senior year, or doing something independently that might be innovative or independent of your school. Right? But junior year is all about showcasing that leadership and ambition and initiative. And then senior year, it's all about maintenance. Right? It's all about maintenance because we have the complexity of application season. Right? So freshman year, exploration. Sophomore year, decide and double down. Junior year, leadership and initiative. And then senior year, maintenance. Okay? All of that kind of goes hand in hand with these takeaways, if you will. All right, so timeline for sophomores. Find activities that you enjoy, and then double down on those. Look for ways to combine your passions and interests for a unique experience. With Crimson, we talk a lot about this idea of a capstone project. I actually push back on that ever so slightly, and I think of it as a series of capstone projects. So it's not just one, but it's thinking about your application and developing what we call your application spikes. Could be one of them, it could be 3 of them, could be more of them, but it really depends on capacity. The issue here is capacity. Remember, academics are priority number 1. If your extracurriculars are starting to take away from your academic success, we need to reevaluate our priorities. Right? The way that admissions officers review applications is that they will assess your academic performance first and foremost. If they feel that you will be set up for success academically, then they will fully evaluate your extracurricular profile. Okay? If they feel like you're not ready for the academics at their school, they'll still look at your ECs, but it's very rare that your ECs will kind of quote unquote save your profile if you're not showing academic readiness for that institution. Okay, so in the candidacy development phase, there's a lot of attention on extracurriculars, and sometimes people get a little bit misguided, or a little bit, they lose sight a little bit of the priority number 1, which is always going to be academics. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about ECs and thinking about extracurriculars in combination of academics. Make sure that ECs are always secondary to your academic performance. Okay. Also, another thing is entering competitions. I never bank as a strategist on competitions. And the reason is that you prep, and then let's say worst case scenario happens is that you get a little bit sick during competition season. And you don't do as well as all the prep work would indicate that you were going to do. So competitions are great, but we need to not rely on them as the only thing in your extracurricular profile, just because those are a little bit more of a risky activity. They are fantastic if you get a placement or recognition. So I highly recommend that you consider them, especially ones that are relating to your intended major. But you need to make sure that you have a fallback plan that's a little bit more stable and a little bit more reliable than a competition that might only take place over the course of a couple of hours, a couple of days, for some of them, a couple of weeks. Okay, so sophomores, consider that. And then for juniors, it's all of that information, but just heightened to that next level, thinking about leadership. So analyze your current activities and determine if they allow you to make an impact. All right, an impact through your leadership, hopefully, where you are not just participating anymore, but you are leading initiatives. You are showing that initiative and extracurricular ambition and having some type of impact. What I mean by impact is, in order to elevate it, more people should get involved. Or if you're fundraising, perhaps more dollars being raised, right? That's how admissions officers think about impact. They think about the actual people that are involved and the ways that people are impacted by your extracurricular engagement. Research future dream schools and see what current students are involved in. When admissions officers are assessing your profile, they're looking for university fit as that third category that we'll look at in just a moment. But a good way to show that you are a good fit for that institution could be to show some of your extracurricular activities that the university might actually be well known for. So this could be like speech and debate. Could be, I don't know, like a cappella for some of these schools as well. All right, but you can, in your supplemental essays, talk about how you would be a good fit that relates back to your extracurriculars for what that school might be known for. All right, and then last but not least, find ways to, two more things. Write down your contributions, because that'll help your activity descriptions, and then find ways to get your organization into the media or featured online, because that can actually help improve your impact by the number of people that have been influenced by your extracurricular engagement. Key takeaways, okay? A well-developed profile, all right? So there is a strategy to help you stand out in the admissions process. So this is not a tried and true formula in that not everybody has to follow this exact formula, but this is a general way to think about a potential extracurricular profile, okay? Freshman year, I told you, is all about exploration, right? And so basically you can kind of tick off a lot of these check marks through just exploring a lot of different opportunities as a freshman. But basically, they want to see some volunteer or community impact. Doesn't necessarily be volunteer only, but volunteering is a good opportunity. And especially for those of you who are juniors, doing some type of leadership initiative relating to community service is a good way to go about that. 3 to 5 activities in which you're overall a leader, 1 to 3 relating to academics, 1 to 2 non-school affiliated activities, could be a summer program, could be sports outside of high school, could be family responsibilities, and then maybe 1 quirky activity reflecting a more unusual or a differentiating extracurricular. Okay? This is a possibility for your extracurricular profile. It's not a requirement by any means. And I've worked with students who have been admitted to top institutions with most of their activities relating to academics, which is interesting when you think about it. But it's how we're thinking about how admissions officers are going to evaluate your narrative as to who you are and what your story is. All right. But for those of you who might be a little bit more of a jack of all trades, if you will, this could be a potential formula for you in thinking about how to develop your ECs and work towards an end result. Again, with Crimson, we as strategists help you develop your overall narrative and thinking about your extracurricular activities. The last component, all right? Personal statements, interviews, letters of recommendation. Okay, so personal statement is the main essay for the Common App. This is all about you as a person. There's actually 7 different prompts, but I actually recommend that you don't write for the prompt. Instead, write for you, for what is important for an admissions officer to know about you, and then backfill and see what's going to be a good prompt to share that information. The reason why I recommend that is because the first 6 are a little bit more direct, but prompt 7 is tell us a topic of any of your choice. So there's always going to be a prompt that is going to fit whatever essay you write. Just choose which part of your life is going to be the best to highlight. The personal statement is really complicated because you only have 650 words to make the admissions officer feel like they get to know you. A little bit of background context. The personal statement was developed because, believe it or not, admissions officers used to interview all of their candidates back in the day when there weren't thousands and thousands of applicants. Okay, so they used to actually have interviews way more frequently. And so as the years went on, more and more people applied with accessibility to these regions and a lot of influx of international students. So admissions officers just physically cannot interview that many students. Okay, so the personal statement kind of replaced the interviewing process that admissions officers used to have. With that in mind, they still value, as universities, as offices of admission, who you are as a person. They want to figure out how you navigate the world outside of your academics and outside of your extracurricular activities. They want to get to know you a little bit as a person. And so cue the personal statement. The way that I like to think about the personal statement is that it brings your application to life. It puts a little bit of the human element back into a review process that is like click and choose, copy and paste for extracurriculars. So it gives you full and total control to showcase your voice, to showcase an element as to who you are in a strategic way. It's hard though, because we have full choice. So it's like going to a restaurant with so many options on the menu. How do you know which thing to choose when 20 options seem like a great fit, right? My advice here is to think about who you are. Right? Think about who you are and what is important to who you are. And if you can link that to your intention for university, that would be a really compelling personal statement, right? But it has to be meaningful to you, right? Meaningful to you and your life story, okay? When an admissions officer is evaluating your personal statement, and then also your subsequent supplemental essays, they want to see who you are. So anything that can make you unique is a good thing to highlight in this particular component of the application. They want you to showcase maybe one of your personality characteristics. Now, I wish that the personal statement was longer, but admissions officers are quite pressed for time. And so it's more strategic to actually just showcase one of your personal qualities or characteristics, and then showcase some type of story that brings that one characteristic or quality to life. They want to see content that shows your personality, and they want you to show, not tell. So there's a difference in giving me some type of story that elevates and demonstrates a characteristic about yourself, rather than saying, I'm really funny, right? I'm really empathetic. They want to actually see that in some type of narrative structure, as opposed to you being very direct and just telling them who you are. They want you to show. It's a more compelling way to develop that narrative. Things that we typically avoid or recommend that you avoid, I recommend that you do not continue your extracurriculars list. I actually typically recommend for the majority of students that you actually shy away from talking about one extracurricular activity in your personal statement. There's quite a tendency, especially if you've developed your own organization or are the leader of some type of club or school organization, that you might want to talk about that as the main thing, and maybe show your ambition or your level of initiative. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it actually gets a little bit more like a continuation of your resume. So they don't want to see a list of achievements or accomplishments. What they want to see is something that's new and compelling that can relate back to who you are as a person. It's a challenge. Sometimes it can be a successful thing to talk about an EC, but for the majority of students, I typically recommend that we shy away from that and talk a little bit more about identity, transformative experience, those types of things. I recommend that you do not repeat information that's already seen in other places in your application. This could be something academic, or it could be in your extracurricular profile. Remember, outside of your personal statement, you also have additional information. So sometimes it's better to just put information there rather than use or quote unquote waste the space in the personal statement. We want it to be personal as much as possible. I recommend that you do not write content that uses unnecessarily ornate or convoluted language. When I was reading for UC Santa Barbara as an admissions officer, I would always kind of chuckle inside when I would see that people were trying to really infuse their personal statement, their writing components with a lot of SAT words. Use your own authentic voice. Don't feel like you need to use these overly beautiful words that people don't necessarily use in their regular day-to-day vernacular. So highly recommend that you just kind of think about writing in your natural voice. And then last but not least, content that tries to prove your academic superiority. So getting a little too technical in your discipline is not necessarily the best place here. And the reason is that admissions officers, they might be reading for your particular major, but they might not necessarily come from your particular major. So don't necessarily get too technical on what you're talking about if you're doing like biology or chemistry, maybe mathematics, astronomy. We typically recommend that you don't get too technical, just because that might have the admissions officers get a little too distracted from what the actual main point is that we want it to be your personality. But it might also get misrepresented in their minds because they might not actually have an idea of what you're talking about. Okay. All right. So there's a couple pieces of advice there. I typically recommend that we worry about essays towards the end of your candidacy development phase. So for those of you who are juniors now would be kind of the time to start thinking about your essays and what you want to highlight about yourself. Okay, sophomores, all right, ask your English teacher for advice on your writing. All right, build narrative skills such as developing your voice, using literary devices, those types of things, and understanding the different mechanics that go into writing. Look at the current year's personal statement prompts and think about how you might respond to them. But again, I actually recommend the opposite direction, is that think about yourself and think about what's important to you to demonstrate, and then think about a prompt that actually is going to serve you best. Last but not least, research future dream schools and see examples of their previous supplemental essay prompts. These do typically change, though, from year to year. So you can maybe see a general consensus for what was the previous supplemental essay prompts, but they are likely to change. The most common SUPs are, why do you want to study at this school? And please expand on one of your extracurricular activities. Those tend to be some of the most common ones. But there's also other schools like Stanford that has a lot of additional supplemental essay questions, which are more like, they call them the short responses or short essays. So they have like longer essays and then like shorter essays that are literally like 50 words. So have a look, have a peek, and see what you're going to be asked, what's going to be asked of you when it comes time to apply. Definitely for juniors, I highly recommend looking at the essays now. All right, Common App typically releases personal statement prompts in January or early Feb for junior year. It's a good thing to just think about what those prompts are. But again, think about yourself first, and then think about what's going to be important for you to highlight and elevate in your application in terms of personal characteristics and qualities, and then look at the prompts that might best serve showing that quality. Begin your personal statement early to have time for revisions. I typically recommend 4 to 6 revisions on average. So keep that in mind as you're writing. 650 words is quite challenging to have all of these elements go together and work. Work with your English teacher, writing coach, essay mentor to improve your writing skills and also get feedback on your essays. Another piece of advice that I have is that I would recommend that 2 other people read your personal statement. One should be somebody who knows you very well, like a family member or a really good friend, maybe a close teacher. And they should feel like your essay is a true representative of who you are and how they know you. The other person should be a complete stranger. And then you should ask them, like, what kind of things stood out? And hopefully those 2 things, those 2 people's feedback are combined, that it's a good representation as to who you actually are, and then that stranger gets that good representation across in reading your personal statement. All right, so that's a next level suggestion that I have for you, that when you're actually done with writing, that somebody can validate that it feels like you, and then that other person gets that impression of you that's already been validated. And last but not least, narrow down your school list to see examples of their previous supplemental essay prompts. Supplements actually typically don't get released at the same time that the Common App releases their prompts. So I would actually recommend typically that you only look at the supplemental essays for that year on August 1st, once the Common App opens for the next round, right? Typically, general timeline-wise, I recommend finishing your supplemental essays later on compared to your personal statement. Personal statement should be finished roughly around August or September, and then that would leave September and October to finish your supplements for your early round schools. Key takeaways, okay? Anchor your essay in a meaningful anecdote that showcases and shows your personal characteristic. Make sure that your story develops, that it has a beginning, middle, and end, and that there is that resolution that is a little bit more forward thinking to who you are and who you want to be at university. And then last but not least, show how you will apply this lesson in the future. Like I said, forward thinking about university. Okay. Candidacy development overall. Okay. Here's the general thought process of what your timeline is going to be looking like. All right. All of this encompasses what we have talked about today. All right. In the junior and sophomore year timeline. All right. So candidacy development for grades 8 to 11, essentially. Okay. Identify extracurriculars and identify academics. Start building both of those things. All right, freshman year, all about exploration. Sophomore year, all about deciding extracurriculars, but also deciding academics and hopefully deciding your future major to then inform your subject selection. Junior year, all about leadership in the first half, and then second half, preparing for university applications. All right, once summer hits, then it's really thinking about all of these different application components. Right, starting your essays, writing your extracurricular activities list, thinking about teachers that you had in junior year that might be good candidates, or forward thinking about teachers that might be good letters of recommendation candidates during senior year. Okay, application deadline, November 1st, all the way through to January 1st. Decisions get released roughly around March. Right, for the early rounds, they typically actually get released in December. All right, but for January application deadlines, those decisions get released in March. So right now, there's a lot of feedback coming through from universities about who's been admitted or deferred or not offered a spot. So it's kind of an exciting time. So check in on your seniors and see how they're doing. And then grade 12, August to September, that's when you get ready to start university. Okay, so with that, we do have a poll question for you, and I will go ahead and pass it on back to Jeremy.
Cool. Thank you. And sorry for that short cutout when you first took over. But for those of you that have been enjoying the presentation, we want to take just a moment to sort of pivot back to Crimson and what Mason does here on a day-to-day basis with students. If what we're talking about sounds interesting, if you still have some questions, we've seen a lot in the Q&A. We're really appreciating all of those coming through. If you would like to sit down with Crimson for a free consultation, I can say confidently, having answered a lot of these, that many of you are asking questions that are really important, but would likely be best answered on a one-to-one basis where we can review your own personal candidacy, tell you what would make sense for your individual situation, because US admissions, like Mason has shared, is so varied, so diverse. We're looking for a lot of different things all the time. So if you would like some more insight on how that might look for your individual unique situation, we would love to set up a free consultation with you to sit down and talk to our team. Please feel free to answer yes to the poll if you are interested. If you have, like we said at the start, come to a lot of Crimson webinars before, maybe you've already been to one, we do have an option for that as well. But please feel free to fill that out. We would love to talk to you more and give you more of an idea about your personal story. Cool. So just to talk a little bit as well about how Crimson Services specifically support what sophomores and juniors are doing here. So taking what Mason is saying sort of generally about extracurriculars and academics, how is Crimson doing that on a day-to-day basis? The main part of our service, the original part of Crimson service, is university admissions strategy or admissions consulting. So this helps you identify what are strong schools for you based on your unique profile, what application rounds you should apply to, so the early versus the regular rounds and the UCs falling in between, and building that personal narrative. I got a great question in the Q&A somewhere in the middle there that was like, what do you do if you feel like you don't have any personality, if you don't know how to sort of find yourself? And that's a very legitimate thought that I think a lot of students that I've personally worked with as a strategist have had. Mason, I'm sure you've had them as well. We love helping you figure out what your story is through your major, through your passions, through what you do in and out of school. There's certainly things that you like to do and things that we can build a story around. So we do a lot of that as well as a part of our consulting. There are tutors widely available. So folks that are taking ACT or SAT, we saw lots of curriculum questions about AP, IB, dual enrollment, you name it. So we have plenty of tutors around the world that specialize in all of these as well. Standardized test prep. Crimson just recently acquired Revision Village, which was the world's largest IB math support company previously. So there's a lot of tutoring services involved in Crimson's network as well. We also provide extracurricular mentoring. So some folks were asking as well in the Q&A, how do I identify these projects to get involved in? How do I go find people in my community to intern with, mentorship? And we have mentors here that will specifically work with you on how to identify those opportunities and reach out. This includes Indigo research as well. So Crimson has a program to be able to pair yourself with a fully tenured professor and conduct research. We have Crimson Careers to do internships at giant companies like Ferrari, Uber, the like. Crimson Young Pioneers, which is an accelerated extracurricular program. Also just generally building your activities list at the end, which we've been talking about a lot today too. And the last part where we were finishing up with the presentation, essay development. Every student that works with Crimson has an essay expert that works hand in hand with their strategist to help write their personal statement, as well as their supplemental essays by school. So we'll brainstorm ideas, we'll figure out what content sounds good based off of Mason's do and don't list. And then we'll talk about how to support those essays through to the finish and actually write with you. You're always writing your own work, but we love to guide. So just to talk quickly about early results as well from Crimson this year, we were super excited to have our best year ever so far. We had 61 admits, in the early round to the Ivy League. So I think we also had a number at Caltech and the like. I saw a stat earlier this week that we have something like 2% of the incoming Caltech classes worked with Crimson. 90 early round admits to the other top 10s here. So Johns Hopkins, Rice type schools. 20 early round admits to Stanford, MIT, Duke, those schools that are not necessarily in the Ivy League, but still have very similar single digit acceptance rates. And then 500 overall admits into the top 50. So even for the students that weren't hitting at the very, very top, tons and tons were hitting just right behind in those top 20s and 30s as well. And if you want to see by school, these are specific numbers at each school. So no matter what Ivy League campus you are on, walking around, you are among other Crimson students, which is a fascinating thought. Specifically at some of those schools that have triple digits at this point, they're all creeping closer too. But if you're at Penn, it's pretty high likelihood that you're probably sitting in class with another student who worked with Crimson at some point. 3,800 offers to the top 50 since Crimson started at this point. And we mentioned it at the very start as well. Average Crimson student is about 4.5 times more likely to be admitted at these top schools than the regular acceptance rate. Cool. Awesome. So that is Crimson in a nutshell. We want to bring it back to lean on Mason's expertise. We have marked a couple of questions already that were in the chat. Mason, I think one that I saw to start, I kind of want to bend in a different way. So Vicky was asking, if the UC itself is looking at applicants not in like the top 9-10% of their class, how do they holistically review those applicants who are in the top 9% or not? How does rank come into play? And I guess to a wider question, any of these single factors, we had a lot of questions in the chat, like my grades are not perfect, maybe my rank isn't perfect. That like question of one thing is not right, but the other things are. How does that look to an admissions officer, and how are you evaluating that type of person?
Yeah, the UC evaluates applications in a very similar way to a lot of smaller private schools. They just do it in a slightly different way because they have way more application numbers in comparison to some of these smaller institutions. So the general way to answer this question is that I'm going to speak about it from the perspective of the UCs, but this is applicable to smaller institutions as well. They want to see that you're going to be set up for success. What admissions officers are doing is that they want to make sure that you're going to be able to graduate in 4 years if you're entering as a freshman. And so if they think that there's anything that is going to be wonky in your profile that is going to maybe inhibit you from graduating in that 4-year time, they might consider not admitting you. And it's to set you up for success. So your grades might not be the greatest, but if they think that you're still going to be able to pass your classes, that's okay. Pass your classes at university. But if you're getting a lot of D's and F's, they might think, okay, well, maybe let's go ahead and have you develop those study skills at another institution and maybe consider the transfer pathway so that you will be set up to graduate then within the 2-year time period. So generally speaking, they want to make sure that you are going to be able to graduate. They also know that you're only a student for a fraction of your time when you're there. It's the majority of your time, but you're only in class anywhere from like 15 to 25 hours. So what are you doing outside of class, outside of studying? How are you going to get involved on campus? Because they want to make sure that you're going to be a contributing member to their campus community and their campus culture. And so they're going to want to see, well, you might just be an academic person, but are you just going to be going to class and that's it? You're not going to actually get involved in any of our hundreds of campus clubs and organizations. Maybe that's not the best fit for what we're looking for in our students, because we want our community to be vibrant. We want them to do things and have an impact outside of academics, right? So they're assessing everything holistically and how it all works together to see who you are going to be on their campus and also graduate within that 4-year time frame.
Awesome answer. Thank you. The next one was from Jill saying, do admissions officers ever look at how well students they've admitted perform in their freshman year? So just curious to see if they're tracking, like, does a student from this school do better than a student from another school? And I'm fascinated to hear your answer here.
Admissions officers, or actually universities overall, need to report they call it their freshman year retention rate. So the percentage of students from freshman year who return sophomore year, behind the scenes, I actually don't know if all universities will look at a specific high school's retention rate. I would imagine that some of them do, especially if they're smaller, especially like liberal arts colleges. They have a lot more high touch when it comes to like tracking students. But for larger schools like UCLA, there's no way that they're going to be able to have access to that data. Once you're in, and then they kind of let you do it. But the idea of having that much of tracking is likely going to be possible at smaller schools rather than bigger schools, just because that's kind of hard data to like maintain.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I worked at Johns Hopkins, the reason I wanted to hear about the UCs, we would certainly track, students who have been accepted from a school before, we wouldn't necessarily look at how they were doing on campus, but we would certainly compare previous accepted applicants from a school to the current year. And the idea there was always that the Office of Admission always wanted to be saying, we're challenging you to present us with a better student than last year. So that typically means they need to have, better grades or more APs or something that looks stronger than that last admitted applicant. But we weren't typically at least going back and looking at first year performance beyond that.
Yeah, that's typically the trend overall, is that like universities love to say this is the most fill in the blank class ever, the most academically rigorous, the best extracurriculars, the most diverse, whatever you want it to be. They want to continually be evolving their campus to whatever that next level might be. And so that's typically what they're going to be looking for in the admitted class, because the admitted class becomes the class.
Yeah. We are getting close to our time. So I see we have a lot of questions here in the Q&A. Hopefully those of you who signed up for an individual consult will have more questions to be answered here soon. But Mason, we're going to pick out just one or two more for us to wrap up here with. I think a great one just in general to kind of summarize the theme of the evening was, what advice do you have for sophomores who want to embark on a passion project, and what are some steps to take in pursuing one? And while that answer comes up, we do have the poll reinitiated for those of you who may want to book an IC still as well.
So thinking about passion projects, the very first piece of advice that I have is take time to sit kind of in isolation and meditate on what are you passionate about. A lot of the candidates development process is becoming self-aware as to who you are and the impact that you want to have on the world. These are big kind of existential questions. So they're not going to be something that you're like readily able to answer. A lot of people don't actually take the time to think about this until these pivotal moments, right? And that's okay. But then you need to think about what are you good at? What are your skills, and what access to networks have you developed from freshman year or even previously that you can then leverage to work with? It's just scientifically backed in terms of research that doing something in collaboration with others is going to set you up more for success than doing something completely and totally in isolation. And the reason is the diversity of ideas, the diversity of skill sets is going to set you up for more flexibility in navigating obstacles, or circumnavigating different issues that arise. So think about the impact that you want to have, and then you need to think about the actual mechanics as to how you're going to achieve that impact. Okay. In the eyes of admissions officers, it's going to sound a bit strange, but they don't necessarily have one preference of one type of impact over another. So they're not going to care necessarily if you're an athlete, or if you're somebody relating to community service, or if you're like purely academic and want to do something like academic in nature where you're like tutoring younger students. But they want to see who you are, because you have complete and total choice over what your passion project might be. So think about who you are, the impact that you want to have, and generally speaking, I try to nudge students in the direction of try to get as specific as possible. Okay, so an example is I'm working with a student right now who loves history, right? There's a lot of history in the world. And so I'm like, well, can you be a little bit more specific as to the type of history that you are most passionate about? That way, that'll help inform, like, are we talking about like the Vietnam War here, right? Like, are we talking about that? Or are we talking about like the history of ancient farming? Like, okay, like we need to get specific there. All right. So think about what you're passionate about and the impact that you want to have. And then try to get as specific as possible in the actual mechanics and the actual subject that you want to have an impact in.
Awesome. I think that's a great answer. Thank you all so much for your questions. We are right at our time for the evening. So we just want to make a huge thank you for Mason for sharing all of this insight, this expertise. Thank you so much for all of your questions, for those of you that have attended and been so great at letting us know what's on your mind. And Mason, I think we have one more slide here just to also pitch an upcoming webinar for Crimson here. If you are enjoying these, if you want to be one of those recurring Crimson webinar guests coming up in a couple weeks, we have a great one on essays that got students accepted. We certainly had some personal statement and supplemental questions here. So that'll be with our own Gabe Gladstein on Thursday, the 23rd. Feel free to throw that in your calendar and register on the website. But Thank you, Mason, so much for being with us this evening. Thank you, everybody who attended. We hope to see you at one of our webinars here in the future, but for now, we'll wish you a great night. Be well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.